that they departed and went from Galilee and the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. And a great multitude followed him there, and he healed them there. Now the Pharisees came to him, testing him. Anybody see a red flag here? Now they're asking him a question, and they really don't want an answer probably. They're just asking for a test. So the Pharisees came to him, testing him, and said, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason?" So now, you have several groups of people in the Jewish religion, and they had different philosophies and different outlooks. You had a group of guys, they were ascetic Jews. And I don't know if you've ever had much contact with the Amish. Well, these were kind of Amish Jews. They didn't want their children learning to speak Greek. They spoke Aramaic or Hebrew. They didn't want them socializing in the Greek culture. They probably lived in a little area right outside Jerusalem called Qumran. We think maybe John the Baptizer could have been part of this group. They're the people who preserved and kept the Dead Sea Scrolls. So when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's probably the reason for this group of ascetic Jews. And they were just kind of, Throwback Thursday. They were kind of into the old style tradition. Then you had a group of guys called the Zealots. The Zealots were your concealed carry Jews. They would have had the Star of David with the "Don't Tread on Me" snake in the middle of it. They wanted to get rid of the Roman occupation. They did not want the Romans to be there, and they were willing to burn the place down to make it happen. And so they were very militant, very anti-government kind of folks. Then you had a group of guys known as the Sadducees. Sadducees were the aristocracy. They had a lot of money. They controlled the temple. They controlled the temple treasury. They had a lot of influence on actually who the high priest was going to be. They believed that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy were the only inspired books in the old law. They did not believe in angels. They did not believe in demons. They did not believe in the afterlife. They believed that you lived here, you did your stuff, and when you died, you were like Rover, you were dead all over. Then you had a group of guys known as the Pharisees. The Pharisees would have believed that the entire Old Testament was inspired. They believed in the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the prophecies, the wisdom literature, and they would also have believed that the sayings of the rabbis were inspired. So if a rabbi said something, it was as powerful as Scripture in their minds. And during the first century, you've got these two rabbis. One is named Shammai, and one is named Hillel. One of them said, look, if you're married and your wife disappoints you, she gains weight, she colors her hair, she burns the biscuits, you can get rid of her. You can get rid of your wife for just any reason. Most of you, if you look at your Bibles, when they ask this question, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? The word "just" in your text is in italics. That means it was added by the translators because they're trying to give you the flavor of this question. They're wanting to know whether or not Jesus endorses one rabbi or the other rabbi. Because the other rabbi said, the only reason you can divorce your wife if she is guilty of some unclean thing. And we surmise that to mean some unclean thing sexually. And we really believe that they weren't just referring to something that she did that was unclean while you were married, but maybe even if you discovered she'd done something prior to your marriage. And so they're asking Jesus, hey, can you just divorce your wife for any reason? Now, if he answers this question, he's going to pick sides. He's going to either be with Shammai or he's going to be with Hillel. Now, if you want to know which one was the conservative rabbi and which one was the liberal rabbi, Hillel was the liberal rabbi. Because Hillel, that's where he was going, straight to Hillel. Okay, that's the only way I could remember it for the test. So that's a little memory crutch. So Jesus has been put on the spot because if he says, no, you don't understand, it's this, then he'll lose half his audience. They're asking him a trick question, hoping he gets himself into political trouble. This is an I got you question. So he answered and said to them, have you not read? He's not quoting Shammai, and he's not quoting Hillel, and he's not quoting Moses. He's quoting God. You guys believe in the inspiration of the Scriptures? Have you not read that he who made them in the beginning made them male and female? And he said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate. He doesn't pick an option. He doesn't go with Shemaiah and he doesn't go with Hillel. He said, let me tell you, when God designed this thing, he designed it one man, one woman for life. Now, the reason I start here in a class of boys talking about relationships with girls is I want to talk about biblical math. Anybody ever heard of new math? In Alabama, this means yes. This means no. This means you're not voting. You ever heard of new math? Yeah, that's where they teach you this weird. Okay, so 1 plus 1 equals what?
2.
You are correct, sir. 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 1 whole. What does Jesus say? 2 equals, that's biblical math. Because what he's talking about is when you get into a relationship with someone, it's not 1 plus 1 equals 2. It's not 1/2 plus 1/2 equals a whole. It's 2 people equal 1. Now, the reason that it's 2 people equals 1 is because, number one, when you get into a relationship, you're giving up some part of your individuality. It's not about me, and it can't be all about her. It has to be about us. Spell the word illness in your mind, I-L-L-N-E-S-S. Spell the word wellness, W-E-L-L-N-E-S-S. The difference between illness and wellness is the concept of I versus we. If you go into a relationship and you're only thinking about I, you will have illness. If you get in a relationship with a girl and she's only thinking about herself, only thinking about I, you'll have illness. But when you can start thinking about us, start talking about we, then you have wellness. And so 1 plus 1, you can't bring that individual in. You've got to be willing to assimilate. Number 2, 1/2 plus 1/2 doesn't equal a whole. If I take 2 halves of a hammer, depends on which 2 halves I have. I don't make a whole hammer if I have 2 handles. If I have 2 heads, you got to have both parts work together. When you start thinking about relationships, you can't be a project. You've got to be a partner. Because you got to bring 2 whole, healthy people, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, into this relationship so that 2 equals 1. Now, if you're out here wandering around and say, well, I can't be happy till I find a girl, and she says, I can't be happy till I find a guy, then what happens if you add unhappiness to unhappiness? You get unhappiness squared. But if I'm happy and you're happy and we combine our happiness, guess what we're going to have? We're going to have happiness squared. When you start thinking about building a relationship with somebody, I tell the girls, if I'm in a class with all girls, and I say, don't get you some little boy that needs to be petted and loved and taken care of. If you need something like that, get a puppy. Because you want to be dating a man. You don't want to be dating a fixer-upper project. You don't want to be dating somebody who can't be happy by themselves, because if they're not happy by themselves, they're not going to be happy with you. I climb a little bit, and I do some teaching of that. I teach rappelling to SWAT teams. I teach single rope technique to people who are interested in it. And there's a big difference in people that I teach to climb and the dude that I climb with. The dude that I climb with, we've been climbing together for 12 years. He got his own gear. He got his own backpack. He got his own harness. He got his own rescue stuff. He knows how to place gear. He knows how to pull gear. He knows how to do self-rescue. He knows how to do partner rescue. When we go somewhere and we climb together, we are a partnership. If I take you guys out climbing and I get in trouble, this could be bad, okay? Because there's a difference in having a partner and having a project. As young men who are entering into dating, you do not want to be a project. You want to be a partner. You want to be somebody that is self-reliant, that is mature, and that is not selfish. And if you can't be those things, you're not ready to date yet. I don't care what your age is. I don't care what your body's doing with hormones. And I don't care whether or not you have your own car. Until you can get a handle on, am I going to be somebody that this girl can respect? You're not ready to date yet. Because when you date a girl, you want her to be with a partner, not a project. And the same thing about who you choose to date. You don't want her to be a project. You want her to be a partner. You want to marry somebody or date somebody or hang out with somebody that you guys mutually, we're not taking questions right now. You want to take somebody that you mutually help each other in your goal to get to heaven and to be successful. Because if you decide to date somebody who has baggage, if you decide to date somebody who has issues, if you decide to date somebody who's got these perpetual problems, getting in a relationship with you is not going to ease their problems. It's going to create more problems because you have two people trying to become one. Does that make sense? Look at Philippians chapter 2. This is how not to be a project and how to be a partner. And he's really not talking about marriage here. He's talking about how people get along in the church. But he lays out some pretty interesting things in Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each of you esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. So in this section, when Paul says this is how you deal with people, this is how you get along with people, he's basically going to say, here's some things that you should do, proscriptions, and here's some things that you should not do, proscriptions, and things that you should do, we call those prescriptions. So what does he say first of all? When you do something, what can your motive not be? Let nothing be done through what? How many of you guys have your Bibles on you and with you and open? All right, got a couple. All right. So Paul says, let nothing be done through what? Selfish ambition. Now, what does selfish ambition mean? I'm just in it for me. Somebody else. That's the illness part.
That you just care about you, not your partner.
You just care about yourself, not your partner. How do you measure trust? Everybody ever thought about that? You know, when you decide, hey, I'm going to go into this and I'm going to trust this guy, or I'm going to trust this girl, or how do you decide whether or not you're going to be a person that people can trust? You may be shocked, or you may just go, oh, wow, I never thought of that. Or it may be obvious. The measure for trust is selfishness. You think about the person that you trust most on the planet, and there's somebody who does not behave selfishly. And you think about the people that you do not trust, and how do they behave? Hey, you want to get picked to be on our tactical team? I don't care how fast you run, don't care how many push-ups you can do. Teach a monkey to shoot a machine gun. You get picked for that team or not for that team, whether or not these men think they trust you, period. End of line. And when you become a man of trust, it's because you've demonstrated in your relationship with your friends, with your teammates, with your girlfriends, that you're a person who is not selfish. Because selfishness is the metric that we use to decide whether or not we trust people, whether we understood that or not. Now, the reason that oftentimes you conflict with your parents is because you're teenagers and you're inherently selfish. It's not a sin to be a teenager. I'm not throwing rocks at you. I'm not kicking you. You just only think in terms of you. So in your mind, life is reasonable. Hey, my curfew needs to be 1:30. I need the keys to the Mercedes and an iPhone 37. And you think that sounds just perfect to you, right? Because it sounds reasonable. Well, a lot of the things that you want and a lot of the things that you ask for, your parents hear an undercurrent of selfishness. And when you do things that seem and act and look selfish to your parents, they immediately say no because it sounds like they can't trust you. Now, they don't always realize that, and you don't always realize that. That's why there's so much conflict between teenagers and parents, is because as teenagers, we're egocentric, and we think only in terms of self. Now, as you mature, you'll grow out of that. When you have the right relationship with a girl, you'll grow out of that. When you get a pet, you'll get out of that. When you have children, you'll absolutely get out of that. When you have grandchildren, you will have selflessness cancer. It'll just take all over you, and you won't be able to do anything but just pet those grandbabies. Selfishness, if I could only talk to an audience one time on one topic, I would talk to audiences about selfishness. Selfishness is the common denominator behind all sin. James chapter 1 verse 13 says we are tempted by the things that we want. And that's one of the reasons why there's no real difference between sin in God's eyes. Now, there are some sins that have different consequences, but the bottom line behind that, there's no such thing as a big sin or a little sin. All sin's the same because it's all rooted in selfishness. I do what I do. My particular sin is the manifestation of selfishness in my life. And your particular sin, whatever it is, the manifestation of selfishness in your life. Selfishness is the common denominator behind all sin. Number two, selfishness is the opposite of love. No, now, Lonnie, the antonym for love is hate. Got it? The antithesis for love is selfishness. Because when I only think about me and not about you, only think about me and not about us, we can't have a very healthy, good relationship. You can't play on a team and be selfish. You can't be in business with somebody and be selfish. You can't be married to somebody and be selfish. In fact, when you look at the ability to deal with yourself, it really is antagonistic to Christianity. If anyone would come after me, he must deny, take up his cross and follow me. If you don't get a handle on self, you can't pick up a cross. And if you don't get a handle on self, you can't follow Jesus. So you've got to get rid of selfishness in your life. And then the last thing is, when you talk about selfishness, is it's a marker of Christian maturity. Now, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and control of the self. If you don't have self-control, you can't be a spiritually mature person. If you don't have self-control, you can't make good decisions because you're only letting that out-of-control selfishness get you. So the first thing that Paul says is that, look, if you want to be a partner and not a project, you've got to be a person who gets a handle on selfishness. You can't do anything out of selfish ambition. Number two, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or, what's the next word there? Conceit. What does conceited mean? Yeah, you ever heard the phrase, he thinks he's all that in a bag of chips? All right, what's that? Self-absorbed, yeah. And I heard a 4-star general talk one time, and he said there's a difference in being self-aware and self-absorbed. And when we understand the difference between self-absorbed, only thinking about myself, or self-aware, then that's a big marker on our maturity. So Paul says don't do anything out of the fact that you've got selfishness. And number two, don't do anything out of this idea that you've got an elevated price tag on who you are. I had a friend named Zach Scott. Zach told me, he said, Lonnie, I broke up with my girlfriend. I said, why? He said, religious reasons. I said, what were those religious reasons? He said, she thought she was God. So he had to break up with her because she was way, way too conceited. A lot of times we think that our last name, our sports ability, our academic ability, we have some kind of criterion that we say, hey, because this is what I am, it gives me special status. And that's just not true. Paul says when you make decisions about how you interact with people, it can't be about how you see yourself. It has to be about how you see them. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition. Don't do anything out of vain conceit. And the idea of that vain conceit is where you give yourself some kind of a price tag and you elevate that price tag. Really, sometimes it depends on the job you're doing. I heard this story. They had this like a picnic on the grounds at this place in Texas. And this guy's walking through the line and he's got a plate and this lady gives him 3 chicken fingers. He said, ma'am, I'd like more than 3 chicken fingers. She said, you get 3 chicken fingers. He said, but I'd like more than 3 chicken fingers. She said, well, you only get 3 chicken fingers. He says, apparently you don't know who I am. And if you've ever said, apparently you don't know who I am, you don't know who you are. But he said, apparently you don't know who I am. She said, sir, I'm sorry, I don't know who you are. He said, madam, I'm the governor of the great state of Texas. Now, she's embarrassed. She's kind of taken aback. She goes, Governor, I'm sorry I didn't recognize you without your suit. You look taller on TV. Please accept my apology for not recognizing you as the governor. She said, but Mr. Governor, do you know who I am? He said, lady, I have no idea who you are. She said, I'm the lady that hands out the chicken fingers. And it really doesn't matter who you think you are. If you're not the lady in charge of the chicken fingers, guess how many you get? 3 and walk on. I mean, that's it. And so when we start making decisions in relationships that say, hey, you don't know me, you don't know you either. Self-made men worship their makers. And it's a monument to unskilled labor. We've got to be men who change the way we see ourselves and change the way we see others. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in lowliness of mind, esteem others better than you. Now, when I get into a relationship and I decide that I'm going to put your needs above my rights, not your wants, not your rights, but your absolute legitimate needs. I'm going to put your needs above my rights, then I've decided that I'm going to be your partner in life. I've decided I'm going to be a person who tries to make the best out of you. And I've decided that I'm going to be a giver, not a taker. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another person. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another person, and it does not consider return of investment. I love you and don't care if you can do anything for me or not. I've chosen, it's a mindset, it's not a feeling, it's an attitude. I've chosen I'm going to do what's best for you, whether or not you can do anything for me, and you really don't even have to be deserving of it. That's the definition for love. Well, that's what Paul says. He says, I'm not going to do anything out of selfish ambition. I'm not going to do anything out of vain conceit, but I'm going to have an attitude that says you're better than me. I'm going to treat you with the idea that you are more valuable than I am, and your needs supersede, are more important, or come before my rights. Change the way you see yourself. Change the way you see other people. That's how you end up being somebody who is a partner and not a project. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. That's the bottom line. He says, when you get into a relationship, and it's a partnership relationship, it can't be one-sided. It can't be all about you. You've got to be willing to make an investment, even if it costs you something, into the good of another person. It doesn't really matter what that person can do for you. It's about what you've decided to do for them. Now, if the other person is in that relationship with the same attitude, look what kind of relationship you have. But if you decide that either I'm going to find somebody who takes care of me, or I got to find somebody that I have to take care of, you're in an unbalanced, unhealthy relationship. As a therapist, we call that dysfunctional. We measure for the chaos factor, or we look at whether or not this is a thing about us or a thing about me. And if I see couples who are only talking about me, my car, my house, my kids, my money, not our house, not our home, not our car, not our kids, not our money, you're going to have problems in that relationship way, way down the line. Now, as Paul talks about this, these basic attitudes of what we're supposed to be as not only as men, but as Christian men, he gives an example. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in lowliness of mind let each of you esteem others better than themselves. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. Let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus, who, being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and taking on the form of a bondservant, and coming in the likeness of men, and being found in the appearance of a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death on the cross. So Paul said, look, you can't be selfish. You can't be full of this vain conceit. You've got to be willing to look at people and change the way you see yourself, change the way you see others, and then you've got to be willing to think about an investment in them and not just an investment in you. And let me give you an example. And the example he uses is Christ. Now, when he tells the story of Jesus, he does not start in the manger. When Paul tells the story of Jesus, he starts in the throne room of heaven. Your attitude and your relationships with other people has got to be the same attitude or the same mindset as that of Christ. Now listen how he describes Christ, who, being in the very form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God. He says Jesus could be considered the same as God, and it wasn't inappropriate to do so. You know, if you could pretend that you walk in the back door and this is the throne room of heaven. Probably a little small, but okay, it's the throne room of heaven. And you've got a throne here and a throne here. Which throne should you bow in front of? You can bow before either throne, because Jesus and God had the same status. It was not inappropriate for him to be considered equal with God. Now, I know that's hard for us to comprehend, that you have the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, and they're the same but different. I get that. What they taught us in Greek class was you have a little thing in the Greek language. It looks like a letter O with a rough breathing symbol called the definite article. And the definite article turns a noun into a proper name. Kind of functions like our capital letter. Everybody understand that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if you've got a buck, you've got a deer. If you have a boy named Buck, capital B, it's a dude, and that's his name. The difference between an object and a proper noun. In John chapter 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The definite article is present, capital G on that God. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was, you got the same word for God, but there's no definite article, there's no capital letter. And so what do you do with that? Well, you know, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. That's not appropriate. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was deity. That's probably accurate, but at the same time, we don't use the word deity much. I don't really understand it. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was the same substance as God. That's probably pretty accurate. Now, I'm not sure that I can explain that to you in a way that is accurate, but this works for me, okay? Not 100% accurate, but it helps me. If we take a glass of water and we put it up here on this podium, what's the chemical formula for water? Yes, sir. H2O. If I take that water and I lower the temperature, and the temperature goes down to 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius, the water becomes a hydroxide. We call it ice. What's the chemical formula for ice? H2O. If I take that water and I warm it up and it becomes a mist or water vapor, what's the chemical formula for water vapor? H2O. 100% water, 100% water, 100% water. 3 distinct manifestations. It's all water, people. It's solid, liquid, and gas. In fact, a chemist told me that there's a thing called the triple point. And at the triple point, gas, liquid, and solid exist in the same environment. And you really can't tell the difference in them. You have Father, Son, and Spirit. 100% God, 100% God, 100% God. 3 distinct manifestations, 3 distinct functions. In John chapter 17, Jesus is in the garden. He's praying to the Father about the Spirit. He is God. So Paul says, I'm sorry, fellas. Paul says, you've got to have the same attitude that Jesus had. Now, what was Jesus' attitude? He was God. But he left heaven and came to earth as a man. Now, I don't want to be irreverent, and I don't want to get into flights of fancy, but have you ever thought that when Jesus came to earth, he probably had some options? You know, I mean, he's coming to start a kingdom. He's coming to essentially become a ruler. You know, let's suppose that we decided we're going to go off the coast here and find us a little island, and we're going to take over. If we want to go take over an island, how would we do it? Well, as Americans, we'd use one of 3 strategies. First thing we do, throw money at it. Right? We just get us a financial campaign. Did you ever think about how rich Jesus could have been? And like I say, I don't mean to be silly, but have you ever thought about that? Jesus could have come to earth and been the richest man here. See, if you can turn stones into bread, you could turn stones into gold. How'd you like to have been in business with Jesus? Would that have been cool? Start a restaurant with Jesus called Bring a Biscuit, Feed Everybody. Just walk in with something. Excuse me, sir, what would you like to drink? Well, what have you got? You would just take the cup back there, it comes back full. Trust me, it's cool. Jesus could have been a multi-gazillionaire. Foxes have holes. Birds have nests. The Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He created everything and owned nothing. They gambled for his clothes when he died, and he had one robe and one tunic. Second thing we do as Americans is we do propaganda. We get us a Facebook campaign, we start advertising on the radio, and we take over by doing propaganda. Could Jesus have had rock star status on the earth? Yeah, I mean, you think about that if you read a sign that said, Jesus will be at the Coliseum performing miracles, you think there'd been an empty seat there? Especially the first night when he does real miracles. He could have filled up every venue, every seat, every time he was in town. Yet how many times did he do a miracle and tell the person, hey, don't tell anybody what I've done to you? How many times did he leave the crowds and go spend the night by himself or on the mountain with his disciples and get away from the crowds? Hey, Jesus could have been super, super popular, but he had a mission that popularity didn't have anything to do with. Third thing we would do as Americans if we decided to go take over an island is we'd use military force. We'd take our army. You could take one Apache helicopter and destroy this whole town. We'd throw it at you. Jesus tells Peter, hey, don't you understand that my Father will put at my disposal 12 legions of angels? Assuming that he's using language that Peter can understand. A legion of angels had 6,000 angels in them, because that's what a Roman legion had. 12 legions of angels is 72,000 angels. We sing the song, he could have called 10,000 angels. We only miss it by 62,000 angels. I guess it just sounds better with 10,000 angels, Stephen. He could have called 72,000 angels. It just doesn't flow right. So we give a little poetic license. One angel in 2 Kings 19 killed 185,000 men. And we're not told that he was armed. Just the angel of the Lord went in and destroyed 185,000 men. If that's the average batting average of your unarmed angel, and you give them 72,000 times 185,000, you understand the devastating power that Jesus had at his disposal? I made that statement in Miami Beach, Florida. A guy walked out the building, and we were talking, and he handed me this card, and it looked like something Wile E. Coyote had drawn on. He said, assuming a 10-hour day and a kill ratio of 185,000 per, you could take 72,000 angels and destroy the world's population in 3.36 hours. Everybody on the planet in 3.5 hours. That's faster than the zombie apocalypse, lads. But Jesus didn't come as an entrepreneur. He didn't come as a rock star. And he didn't come as a general. He made himself of no reputation and humbled himself and became an obedient servant to the point of death, even the death on the cross. When Jesus decided to come to earth and exert influence rather than power, he came as a servant. A special kind of servant. A servant here is called doulos. It's a bond servant. A bond servant was the least expensive, least educated servant you could have at your house. His job was to wash people's feet. And you could buy one for 30 pieces of silver. Paul says, you want to know how to be a partner and not a project? You want to know how to be a real man in a relationship? Change the way you see yourself, change the way you see others. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition. Don't do anything out of vain conceit. In lowliness of mind, esteem others better than. In fact, you need to have the attitude that Christ had. Because even though he was God and could have been an entrepreneur and could have been a rock star and could have been a powerful military leader, he came as a servant. If you're going to be the man in a relationship with a female, and you're not willing to be a servant for the rest of your life to help her get to heaven, don't get in a relationship with that girl. If you're a man in a congregation and you're not willing to be a servant of the needs of that congregation, don't take on a position as an elder. Don't take on a position as a deacon. Don't take on a position as a preacher. And really rethink, do I really have the position as a Christian? If my master is a servant, the greatest thing I can ever hope to become is a servant. And if we're going to be men in relationships who have real honor and real influence, not power but influence, we're going to have to decide that when I get into a relationship with a young lady, I'm going to be a partner, not a project. And I'm not going to be a project because I'm going to be a servant. I'm going to try to put her needs above my rights. Read Ephesians chapter 5, the famous chapter on marriage. Verse 25, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of the water by word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she should be holy and without blemish. Husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. What he says is that when Jesus came, that Jesus put the needs of the church, Jesus was submissive to the needs of the church. And if we're going to be real men of God, when we get in relationships with these young ladies, we're going to have to be men who are willing to be submissive to the needs of the church and the needs of our wives. Let me ask you something. Anybody in here have a really cool phone, a new iPhone,
I do.
a new Galaxy?
I'm not going to.
Okay? If I borrow your phone, I'm not going to do that. If I borrow your phone, how do you expect me to treat your phone? What do you think?
Nicely.
What if I borrow your car? How am I supposed to treat your car? Like it was mine. And how do I return that phone? Without scratch, without spot, without stain, without wrinkle. What do I do with your car? You better not have a scratch on it. I'm telling you that right now. If I borrow anything that you've got that's valuable, how am I supposed to treat it? Like it is priceless. Excuse me, Mr. So-and-so. I'd like to borrow your daughter and take her to the movies, or take her on a picnic, or take her to the fair. When you bring that girl back to that house, fellas, how's she supposed to look? If she has a spot, a stain, a wrinkle, or a blemish, you a dead man. They won't even look for your parts, son. I'll tell you that right now. And if you're not willing to protect her spiritually, emotionally, and physically, don't walk away from that house with her. Now, I know as young men we won't be cool. We won't be that guy. We won't be Mr. Player. Look, this is the time you put your ego on the shelf and you decide to act like a man. Because when you leave my house, up until a certain age, if my daughter got anything to eat, if my daughter had anything to wear, if my daughter went anywhere, I took her and I provided it for her. You come to my house and you say, hey, I want to take the role you've had with your daughter and provide for her food, her transportation, and her safety. That's not a job a boy does. That's a job a man does. And don't come back to my house and say, hey, we ran into this trouble and your daughter's missing and I can't find it. You both come back and neither one of you comes back. And I'm not playing. If you're not willing to act that way in the presence and the company of the girls you date, don't date them. Because we're not asking you to go out here and play some game. We're asking you to be a man around these girls. And even if it's a girl you're not going to marry, when you borrow somebody's daughter and you put her in your car, you are taking care of her like her father would take care of her. And if you're not willing to do that, don't have her in your company and don't be in her company. Because you're not willing to be a partner. You're trying to be a little project. Trying to say, well, what can she do for me? What can she do for my ego? What can she do? And you don't need to play that game. And if you're not willing to be men of God and treat the ladies like ladies of God, then you're only willing to be a project. You're not willing to be a partner. Any questions? Thank you, Brother Stephen.